Welcome back to Modern Middle Eastern History 301, everyone. Grab a seat. I am so glad you could join me today. Through this explainer, we are going to explore the absolutely fascinating, deeply contradictory 33-year reign of Abdul Hamid II. He was the 34th Sultan and, crucially, the last guy to actually hold effective, absolute control over the fracturing Ottoman state. He took the throne in 1876, which was a time when the empire was just drowning in debt and facing massive territorial losses, and he clung to power until his really dramatic deposition in 1909.
All right, here is our syllabus for today's explainer. We'll be hitting 5 main beats: the sick man's autocrat, paranoia, carpentry and Verdi, pan-Islamism and global diplomacy, repression and minority uprisings, and finally, revolution, exile, and legacy. Let's get right into it.
So, I want to kick things off with a massive contradiction. Our essential question for today's class is this: how did Abdul Hamid's desperate attempts to modernize and save the empire engineer his own downfall? It's just a classic historical irony. I mean, he knew the empire needed modern, educated professionals to survive, right? But education inevitably breeds critical thinking, and, well, critical thinkers rarely tolerate autocracy. Part 1. The Sick Man's Autocrat. Let's set the stage by examining the immediate chaos of his early reign. Now, look at this incredible paradox. When Abdul Hamid came to power, he actually worked with reformists known as the Young Ottomans and promulgated the empire's very first constitution in 1876. But then, boom, following a disastrous war with Russia, he completely pivots. He suspends that very constitution, kicks out the parliament, and reverses the liberal trajectory of the earlier Tanzimat reforms to rule with absolute power from Yildiz Palace for the next 30 years. So he's a reactionary autocrat, right? Well, hold on. He was also a massive modernizer. He established Istanbul University to serve his broader centralization goals, built huge networks of primary and professional schools, and constructed vast telegraph and railway lines, like the famous Hejaz Railway. He was trying to centralize his empire through technology and education, even as he completely crushed political freedom.
Moving on to Part 2, paranoia, carpentry, and Verdi. To really grasp the history of this era, we have to look at the bizarrely isolated man living inside the palace. Behind that terrifying, rigid public persona, he had an unexpectedly relatable private life. Seriously, he was a highly skilled master carpenter whose furniture is literally still on display today. He was absolutely obsessed with opera, specifically Verdi, and personally wrote the first ever Turkish translations of classic operas. He loved traditional oil wrestling. And this is my favorite part. He was a massive Sherlock Holmes nerd. He even awarded author Arthur Conan Doyle a Royal Medal in 1907, probably just for keeping him entertained at night. It is a stark, almost comical contrast to his reputation as a ruthless dictator. But imagine the psychological toll of his isolation. Put yourself in his shoes for a second. Haunted by the memories of predecessors who were assassinated or overthrown, his intense paranoia shaped literally every state policy. The guy was so terrified of a coup that he constantly carried a pistol. He refused to let his own army train with live ammunition out of fear they'd turn their weapons on him. Even worse for the empire, he didn't trust the reformist admirals of his navy, so he actually locked the world's third largest fleet inside the Golden Horn and just let it rot, which indirectly caused massive territorial losses overseas. Add in his secret police and a massive network of informants, and the whole empire was suffocating under intense censorship and fear. All right, Part 3, pan-Islamism and global diplomacy. Let's look at his foreign policy and see how this builds into a really complex survival strategy. Faced with European powers eager to just carve up his territory, he had to get creative, especially because his imperial sovereignty was severely compromised by the 1881 debt decree, which handed revenue straight over to European bondholders. So he masterfully played the great powers against one another. To counter British and French influence, he strategically aligned with Germany, hosting Kaiser Wilhelm II and handing over German concessions like the Berlin-Baghdad Railway. He even flexed his diplomatic soft power with the United States. In 1898, the U.S. asked for a favor, and he ordered Sulu Muslims in the Philippines to submit to American rule, saving the U.S. thousands of troops. But his real geopolitical shield was pan-Islamism. He realized the old reformist ideas of a unified Ottoman identity just weren't holding the fracturing empire together anymore. Instead, he literally weaponized his religious title as caliph. By emphasizing this role, he projected power globally,
subtly threatening Britain, France, and Russia with the idea that he could incite massive uprisings among the Muslim populations living in their colonies. It was a brilliant, if entirely desperate move. Section 4. Repression and minority uprisings, because his attempts to enforce a unified, centralized state at home led to severe internal fractures. As historians, we must objectively examine the grim reality of this era. 300,000. According to historical sources, that is the estimated number of Armenians killed during the Hamidian Massacres in the 1890s. The sources detail that as Armenian groups demanded the rights they had been promised by international treaties, revolutionary organizations started to form. Abdul Hamid's response was brutal suppression. He basically gave semi-official status to armed Kurdish militias, the Hamidiya regiments, who were given free rein to attack. This horrific crackdown sparked international outrage, earning him the nickname the Red Sultan in the West. The violence escalated so much that Armenian revolutionaries actually attempted to assassinate the Sultan with a car bomb outside the Yildiz Palace in 1905. He only survived because he was delayed by exactly 1 minute. 60 seconds saved his life. This relentless cycle of censorship and rebellion inevitably brings us to Section 5, Revolution, Exile, and Legacy. And here we loop right back to our essential question. The very professional schools Abdul Hamid founded to modernize the Ottoman workforce, they became the exact incubators for the Young Turk Revolution. Students and military officers chafed under his clumsy, heavy-handed censorship. A broad opposition movement formed, led by the Committee of Union and Progress. By the summer of 1908, military units actually marched on Istanbul, and Abdul Hamid, realizing he was completely cornered, was forced to capitulate and restore the 1876 constitution he had killed 30 years prior. Things unraveled fast after that. Following the 1908 revolution, there was a really delicate, tense standoff. Then, a conservative counter-coup erupted in April 1909, known as the 31 March Incident. Abdul Hamid was suspected of supporting this reactionary push against the Young Turks. The response was immediate. An action army marched straight into the capital, and parliament formally deposed him. He was sent into exile, eventually returning to Istanbul under house arrest at the Beylerbey Palace, where he spent his final years quietly practicing his beloved carpentry and writing his memoirs, until he died in 1918. Just to quantify the immense wealth and power he controlled during his reign, $1.5 billion. That was the staggering estimated value of his estate in 1930 when his heirs sued for it. A massive fortune for the last absolute monarch of a sprawling, though shrinking, empire. Today, modern scholars are really reevaluating his legacy. For a long time, he was viewed purely as a reactionary tyrant who just held the empire back. But recent assessments emphasize his massive public works, his advancement of the Tanzimat reforms, and his deep educational legacy. Even recent political trends in modern Turkey have seen a resurgence in his personality cult. He was a deeply paradoxical figure. I mean, think about it. The modern Turkish state was essentially built by the very generation of bureaucrats and officers who were educated in his schools. I will leave you with this final thought for today's class, and I want you to really think about this as you review your notes. As we weigh his crippling paranoia against his undeniable progress, did his 33-year reign successfully postpone the death of the sick man of Europe, or did his autocratic methods make that final collapse entirely inevitable? Think it over, and thank you for joining me for this explainer. I will see you all in our next session.